So it's kind of interesting, the virtual app and virtual desktop tech update sessions happening next door. That's the one I used to always do. Now I know how all the other co-presenters at Synergy felt when I was presenting that session, because everyone's over there. So for those of you who skipped that session to come here, thank you for joining us for part 2 of the Geeks Guide. How many were in part 1? Ooh, all right,
good.
Quite a bit. All right, so beyond passwords. You know, we love passwords, so why would you go beyond it? But there's a lot of reasons why. There's a lot of technologies out there. We're gonna walk you through some of these things and how you can integrate this into Workspace. But so far, what we've done with this whole Geeks Guide thing is we built the foundation. In the last session that all you were there, we built Workspace, integrated all the different services just at a very high level. We didn't do a lot of special configurations because that's what all these sessions are gonna be. So in this session, we're gonna focus specifically on identity and how we can provide different forms of identity into our Workspace environment. So identity is basically who you are. And if you think about things, you know, you end up with a lot of identities in the world. If you think about how many different accounts you've created, you have a lot of unique identities. So if I look at my day and how I sign in, you start to see where you get a lot of issues with having multiple identities. So first thing I do is I go to my home office. Yes, that is my front yard about a week ago. No. But the nice thing about working in a place like this is it keeps your beer cold. Now, Martin, your home office is a little different, right?
Yeah, my home office is slightly different, but we also have some periods of the time when we don't work outside, like the picture over here. So it's interesting how, you know, having this whole, you know, work from home, just different places you can go and different experiences you have of working. But so you go to your office, and then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to sign into your desktop. Then you're going to sign into you know, Gateway or Storefront or Workspace or whatever you're using, and then you're going to sign into different SaaS applications. So now you have all these different identities, because my identity on the PC is different than my identity from Workspace, which is different from my identities from all the different SaaS applications. So it's really hard to keep all these things straight and all the different passwords associated with them, because as you all know, we're supposed to have unique passwords for every account that we have, and that's not going to be the case because those are all my identities that I could come up with. So I counted mine when I saw this slide, and I came up with number of 1,107 identities that I'm using. I'm the security guy, so.
Yeah, this was like 78, so I don't feel so bad. But there's a lot of identities. And so now you're trying to think about, I got to create passwords for each one of these. And when you have all these different password complexity rules, it's really hard to come up with them, come up with unique ones. And you have a good one, it's like there's some reason or another it's not going to allow it for you. You didn't include a number, or one of your letters isn't uppercase, or you don't have some crazy character. So it really gets difficult trying to come up with all these unique passwords. But in the end, this whole thing, all these things work the same. You have an identity, you have multiple identities. Each one of those identities is coming from an identity provider. And that all gets stored in some data store, an identity data store. You know, so all these different systems you have. And you interact with these identity providers all the time, you know, when using technology and beyond, you know, technology. So for example, you have a passport. That's your identity. Now, if you have an American passport, the identity provider comes from the US State Department. You have a credit card. That's an identity. Your identity provider is Visa, MasterCard, Discover, whoever created that password. And then you have, of course, your Active Directory identity, which is coming from Windows Active Directory. And the data store is, you know, that DIT file. So that is how all these things fit together. Now, when you integrate Citrix Workspace into this, what you end up doing is you have a new thing. It's called an identity broker. And that's what Workspace is doing. It's brokering the identities for you. So you don't have to have that Citrix identity. You could use a different identity provider to log into your Citrix environment. So and this, again, happens in the real world. So here we look at the passport. The identity broker in this scenario is TSA. When you go to the airport, they're looking, that's one example of an identity broker. In the credit card environment, you go to the grocery store, it's those you know, credit card readers. That's an identity broker looking at your identity and validating it, you know, validating it with the identity provider. And then with Workspace, we have this identity broker microservice. For a while, it's just been Windows Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. But now it includes Okta, Citrix Gateway, your on-prem deployment of Citrix Gateway. It could be Google ID. It could be Ping. A lot of different identity providers that are out there that we're able to use to have you do that initial login to Workspace. And then from there, it single signs you on to all your other applications, whether it's SaaS web applications, whether it's the Citrix virtual apps and desktops, published apps or published desktops. So that is the high level of identity. But the second part, so identity is who you are. Then you move into authentication, and it's proving you are who you say you are. And this is where you start getting the challenges, authentication factors. And you hear about this all the time, and it's always what you know, or it's what you have, or it's what you are. These are the three main factors that we use to prove you are who you say you are, for authentication. So what you know could be something like a PIN or a password. What you have, a token, could be a physical token, could be a virtual token, could be a certificate. It's something that you will physically have on your device or in your hand or with you. And then what you are, could be biometrics. It's pretty much what that's going to be, is fingerprint, retina scans, face recognition, with Windows Hello. But all these things together are the different factors that you can have when you authenticate. Now, one of the things that's interesting when I learn more about this is I always hear people talk about multi-factor authentication. It's like, hey, I want to buy multi-factor authentication. I always think of, the best princess movie in the whole world is, inconceivable. Is people say multi-factor authentication thinking it's a product you can buy. It's not. It's a concept. So MFA is basically taking two of these, taking either a what you know and a what you have, or a what you have and a what you are, and combining it together. And it's a multi-factor, using multiple factors to authenticate into the environment. So when we talk about multi-factor, we're talking about integrating multiple approaches just to authenticate you into the environment. And then that takes us to the next stage, is authorizing.
Yeah, so authorization, the theme of the day is beyond password. So what we've been talking about so far is mostly the stuff that most of you know. So I have a quick question. How many of you are using Windows? OK. The next question that I have, how many of you got something to complain about Microsoft or Windows? And I want to see all the hands. Now, my big complaint about the Microsoft, talking about security, is that thanks to the Microsoft, most of the Windows administrators don't understand the difference between authentication and authorization. So if you talk to Windows administrators, many of them are going to say auth. No one outside of the Windows world is going to understand what you mean. So what we are doing in Windows is that we log on to domain controller, and we are authenticated and authorized at the same time. Now, how this would look like in the real life, I'm going to use the same example with the passport and the State Department. So imagine that you go to the airport and you wait in the line. You just need to drop off your luggage. When it's your turn, you give them the passport, you wait to be authenticated, then you can leave the luggage. You go to TSA, wait in the line, hand them over the passport, wait for authentication and authorization, then you can go. You go to the gate, you have to wait, you have to show them the passport again, you need to be authenticated and authorized at the same time. You go to board the plane, you have to show them the passport, you need to wait to get authenticated, then you are authorized to board the plane. That's not really, as you can see, this is very limited. This is not what we want. So what we are doing in real life is that we are combining authentication and authorization. You go to the airport, you go to TSA, you show them the passport for authentication, you got the token, in this case boarding pass, and you are just going to show this everywhere and quickly go through because you are already authenticated, you are just authorizing to board the plane. Now, in IT, the concept that I'm going to talk about, this is pretty much based on the OAuth 2.0 or OpenID Connect. This is the modern and secure authorization. This is beyond password. This is something that allows us to pretty much bypass the traditional passports. So I'm the user, and what I want to do is that I'm using some of the web applications. And I would like this web application to read the document that I have on the Google Drive. How the modern authorization works is that the web application is going directly to Google and it's going to request access to this document. The next step, Google is just going to authenticate me. If I'm already signed in, it's just going to ask me, do you want to provide access to this document? When I click yes, the next step is that the Google is going to directly contact the web application and provide it with the data. This is simplified version, but this is pretty much how the modern web authorization works. Now, there are a few interesting things about this concept. The first one is that pretty much what you are doing is that you are doing access delegation. You are saying, I would like to give permissions to this web application to access this one, and I don't want to sit in the middle. I just want to delegate the access. To give you another example of something that you are doing pretty much every day, where you are using this concept, I have an Xbox One. I'm using the Netflix application. Netflix application is client. When I log on first time and I authenticate, it's the Netflix client that is authenticating against the Netflix service. And from that moment, I'm delegating access to the client to use the content that I have. So the fact that I'm here in Synergy, it doesn't mean that my family cannot watch the Netflix, because I'm able to completely delegate the access that I'm using. Now, I was also saying that this is secure. Why is this secure? There are two reasons. And notice that all this communication is completely bypassing the user. So if you would like to have the man-in-the-middle attack that is listening to the traffic, he would need to sit between Google and the web application and not on my endpoint. It's very easy to infect my endpoint, but infecting Google as company, that's definitely much harder. The last reason why we are calling this modern and secure is, let's say that this data is highly sensitive. Let's say that this data is my social security number. Notice what? The social security number is never going to the end user. It's never going to the endpoint. So even though I'm delegating access, I'm saying this web application can access this data that I have from my identity provider, the data itself will never reach my endpoint. So that's why we call this modern and secure. And this is the modern concept that's slowly coming to the Windows world. And this is something that pretty much allows us to stop using the passwords in the future. Now, there are a couple of really cool things that we can do with modern authorization. One of them, the really good example, is the TOTP.
So this is, I know a lot of you have probably seen something like TOTP before. You know, you get the numbers that changes every 30 or 60 seconds. You know, we used to have those physical tokens, and now they're virtual tokens, on your mobile device. So within Workspace, what we can do is there's this ability to turn this on, for your users, so they can use this to help provide the multi-factor authentication into Workspace instead of just a username and password. So if we look at, if we think about this, this just makes things a little bit more secure to our environment, because you have that number that's changing. So let's look a little bit deeper on how this actually works, how TOTP actually works within the environment. So first thing is, there's all of these different authenticator applications. You got Microsoft Authenticator, Google, you got the Citrix SSO, and there's tons more. I mean, you go in the app stores, there's tons of them. A lot of these are all based on industry standards, so it doesn't matter. Within Citrix Workspace, it has TOTP, time-based one-time password. You don't have to use Citrix SSO. You can use Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator, because it's all standards. It's all just industry standards on setting this up. So when we go back to factors now, and let me show you why this is now considered multi-factor. User uses their endpoint, they launch a web application. So the web app is now going to provide you with a password prompt, and it's going to provide you with a TOTP prompt. And then based on you putting those in correctly, you get authenticated. The identity provider authenticates you. So the password prompt is something because it's just a password that you've created, and only you should know it. Now the TOTP, it's something you have. And we'll show you why in a little bit of why it's something you have. What is that piece of information that you have that makes TOTP a different factor for the environment? So this is how we end up getting multi-factor authentication with TOTP. So with TOTP, it's all based on a pre-shared key. And you get this key from the infrastructure. So what happens is when you register for a token, a key appears, and the key gets stored on your endpoint device, on your mobile device, and it gets stored on the infrastructure. What happens then is when you launch the Authenticator app and trying to authenticate with this, the system takes that key and uses an algorithm against the current time and comes up with a 6-digit number that changes every 30 seconds. Now, because the backend infrastructure has the exact same key, and hopefully the time is synchronized, it should get the exact same number. And then when you enter that in, it's just a simple comparison. Does this number match this number? Yes, OK, then you have that pre-shared key. So that pre-shared key is the something you know. That's what gives you the multi-factor authentication within the environment. So when we started adding TOTP into our workspace environment, I heard a lot of people dropping the T because there is also OTP, one-time password, and there's also time-based one-time password. So what we're talking about is time-based one-time password, but they're almost identical. But there are some unique differences on it. So they're really using the same underlying infrastructure, except with OTP, this is when you go to a website and you authenticate with your username and password, then it comes up with something like this, and it says, we are sending you a token. We're sending you this 6-digit number you need to enter. And you can pick, do you want it to be SMS to you? Or if you don't have access to SMS, it could email it to you. So here's the problem. Email, you're signing in with a password. So it's no longer, this OTP no longer is an additional factor. It's not something you know. Because I can then access the email with something you know, get that token, and enter it in there. So I've eliminated that something you have factor. There is no something you have. SMS would be the something you have, because it's tied to your phone. But if I can bypass that, and a lot of these do, let you bypass the SMS because you might not have cell phone connectivity, it would then email you instead. And email is just a password. Whereas TOTP, it's a local app. You have a pre-shared key on that local device, which is the something you have, which gives you the multi-factor. The reason why one's could be better than the other is OTP requires connectivity. You have to have connectivity. Either mobile connectivity through the cell phones, or you have to have access to your email to be able to get that code that they sent you. Whereas the TOTP, it's completely offline. It'll work whether you're on airplane mode or not, whether you have a Wi-Fi connection or not, it'll always work, just because it's a local application using a local key that you've installed as part of the token registration process. So conceptually, if we look at the first-time user, what ends up happening is user connects to Workspace app from their device and connects up to the Workspace experience running in Citrix Cloud. And this is going to go ahead and go to this whole identity broker microservice. And the user is going to say, hey, I don't have a token, register me. I need to register a token. So Workspace is going to talk to this email registration, email microservice, and it's going to email you a verification code, to the email that's associated with it. Now, you enter that into Workspace app, and then it's going to verify the code that it sent you in email, and then it's going to verify your credential, back to Active Directory. And once you have that, it's then going to give you this token that you'll be able to scan within the Authenticator app. And now you have that token, you have your time-based one-time password set up. So then when you actually want to go ahead and authenticate using this, you go ahead and log into Workspace app, talks to the Workspace experience. The identity microservice now provides you with your username, password, and the TOTP prompt. So you enter the username and password, and then you launch your token, you enter in the prompt, and it goes ahead and authenticates the token first, and then it goes back to the backend identity provider that you've selected and authenticates you against Active Directory in this case. And then once that's done, it talks this whole resource feed microservice and then gathers all the resources that you're authorized to access. Which virtual apps and desktops, which SaaS and web applications are you authorized to access? So we'll take a look at how this actually works within Workspace app, or the Workspace environment. So within Citrix Cloud, what we're going to do is in the identity section, there's a section here, Active Directory and Token. So go ahead and turn it on. So this is basically saying we will allow this within the environment. to authenticate. It's one of our approved authentication methods. So for this particular workspace deployment, now we're going to go ahead and turn it on for all the users. So basically, it was 2 radio buttons that we enabled it. So now, all right. So we can go in here and look to see if users have a token already registered. So in case you have a token registered already, let's say you already had this thing going, you can go in there and delete them, and it'll force the user to re-register their token. From the user perspective, what you end up having is user launches Workspace App. In here, I don't have a token yet. The admin reset it because I had one or my device was stolen. So I can go in here and enter in my password or enter in my email address that's associated with this account. So it's now emailing me this verification code. I enter that in along with my password for my account. So it's verifying it, and here's my token. So you scan this with your phone, or you enter in that code after you've downloaded the Authenticator app, of course, and then you now have that 6-digit token that changes. So that QR code is your key. If you can't scan it, there's a whole string of alphanumeric characters you can enter in manually, but this is going to go ahead and scan it, and there's the token all set up. So once that's done, the user can then go back and redo their authentication into Workspace using their username, using their password, and using that token, and it goes ahead and authenticates you into the environment. And you'll be able to access the different applications. Some considerations on this is, at least from the workspace perspective, is there's this whole thing called a replay attack. And it's like, if I get your password, how long can I use that to break into the system? Using something like this, you have 30 seconds. So I can give Martin my token, and he has 30 seconds to log in. And after that, he'll no longer be able to use that token. So if somebody's looking over your shoulder and they see the number, they have 30 seconds to hurry up and enter that in, assuming they have your username and password. From the workspace, it only supports one device. You can only have one token associated per user. But there's nothing preventing you from taking this thing and scanning it across multiple devices. And this is something really stupid to do, is to put your token on a screen in a presentation like this, where you have a lot of technical people who are going to try to start scanning this. I see you with your phone out. So just so you know, I have modified the QR code and the numbers because I don't trust anyone. And this is actually for a test app or a test user that's not even alive anymore. But if you use this and you're putting out documentation for your users on how to do this, don't put your real key in there because it's not going to work. So you could actually scan this with one of those Authenticator apps, and you will get a token. It's just not the right token. You will get numbers, but it's not the right numbers associated with that account. So that is how you start adding multi-factor authentication into our workspace.
So let me share the real-life story that happened to me with you to kind of open this section. And it happened recently because it happened to me on Friday last week. So I'm doing the deep web monitoring for my whole family. I'm a bit paranoid. And I found out that my wife's account has been hacked. And pretty much every single password that she's using is available on the deep web if anyone wants to buy it. So we spent beautiful weekend before Synergy trying to find all the identities that she's using, trying to find where she's using like duplicate accounts, pretty much doing kind of assessment of what's happening. And then she asked me, which password should I use to make sure that it is secure? And that was a really stupid question to ask, because I started giving her the list of how the password should be, how it should be long, how it should start using like the local slang in her native language, she shouldn't use English, and so on. And she came back to me after 2 hours and she just told me, I forgot the password that you just told me. So we actually spent I showed her this presentation because I was trying to explain to her that you can actually have access to the websites and to services without using any password at all. And one of the ways how you can do it is called federation. So I told her that she's not on any social media, but I told her you should create the Facebook account that you are going to use only for authentication and nothing else. You don't need to add any family members, nothing. And when you go to the website and you see all these options, sign in with Google, sign in with Facebook, what you are looking at is called federation. And it's a very common mistake where people believe that federation allows you to use one account across multiple systems. That's not really how it works. What federation allows you to do is that you have your object, you have your account, you have one attribute of that account, and you use this attribute to link multiple accounts together. So you kind of chain the accounts together. So again, this is not about using one account across multiple systems. It's about linking these accounts together. For the end user experience, it looks like it's one account, but technically speaking, it's again multiple accounts that are just linked together. So now to show you again, this is going to be a very similar example as I was showing for the authorization, because this is the same technology pretty much. Let's say that I'm going to log on to this web application and I don't want to register. I don't want to create new identity, and I notice they have an option, sign in with Google. So I love it and I would like to use it. So I click on the sign in with Google account. And what this web application is going to do is that it's going to ask Google as identity provider, I would like to have access to following attributes. The list goes on. Picture, full name, email address. That's pretty much the typical three that are being requested. This could be Facebook, this could be Twitter, this could be anything. Now the next thing that I do as the user is I authenticate against the identity provider and I approve this request. Again, this is pretty much the same concept as the modern authorization. The user experience, the user doesn't really know how this is happening. All they see is that they click on sign in and they are asked by Google, do you want to provide access to this information from your account? Yes or no? Now, when I approve this, Google is going to contact back the web application and it's going to provide it with all the data that was requested. So the web application from this moment can see my picture, my full name, my email address. The next step is it's going to look at the local identity store and it's going to find the matching account that is using the same email address. If it doesn't exist, very often it's automatically going to create it. If it can find it, or once it's created, voila, I'm allowed to log in. I'm going to see my name, I'm going to see my picture, I'm going to see everything. And my experience is that I just logged on to this web application without using any password at all. So another example that I'm showing you here is, this is the local bakery that's next to my house. And they don't want to handle the passwords. We have all the new regulations, we have GDPR, so for many companies, it's actually not as easy to be dealing with the sensitive data as before. So what they would like to do in this hypothetical scenario is that they would like to allow customers to log on using the Facebook account and make an order. The way how this would be implemented is that this web application that they use would ask for the first name, last name, email. As soon as I authenticate through the Facebook, they are going to find a matching account, which is just some random UID, and they will match it based on email attributes. And then they are going to have in this account also information about the orders that I'm using. Again, my user experience is I'm just using my Facebook account. Technically, no. Technically, you are using two separate accounts. It's just completely seamless experience for the end user. So again, notice in this case, there is no password at all. It's completely passwordless approach, how I can log on to all these different resources and how I can use them. Now, the thing is that you need to have some components that is going to do this authentication and this matching for federation, and that's why we are using the Citrix Gateway.
Yeah, so with the TOTP, we talked about, it's a component, or it's a capability you can add with within Workspace experience, a cloud service. But a lot of people who have like a Citrix virtual app and desktop deployment on-prem already, you might already have gateway running there, and you might have complex authentication policies or multi-factor authentication policies in place. So now what we're able to do is have you log in to Workspace using your on-prem gateway, using your on-prem gateway as the IDP. So if we look at how this architecture will look like, is user logs into Workspace, the identity broker microservice is then going to talk to your on-prem gateway. And based on the policies you have set, this could be talking to on your on-prem Active Directory or Radius. If you wanted to, you could be using Google as the IDP. The gateway would just use Google up to the IDP. You could use Ping. You could use Okta. You could pretty much use anything that the on-prem gateway would be able to do to handle the authentication for you. So what this would look like from the user perspective would be, so here the user is going to log into their citrixcloud.com account, for this particular customer. You see it's loading Workspace, but instead of seeing that traditional Workspace login, now we're back down to the Citrix gateway. So here I'm using my username, I'll use a password, and I have a token that's running on-prem on the Radius server. So you'll be able to enter this in, and once you authenticate, it then sends you back up to your Workspace environment, and it fully logs you in, and you get that whole Workspace experience, with the different apps and desktops and files. So this is using what you might already have running on-prem, and again, integrating this up into the Citrix Workspace. So a lot of people have gone down the on-prem gateway routes because of something called N-factor. And this allows you to do different authentications from like a single entry point. And so I was trying to understand this because networking is so not my area. And so I finally figured out how I can explain this pretty well. So here you have, pretty handsome guy, it's external, very smart and intelligent, I think.
And he's going to get better.
He's very trustworthy. So company, he's using a corporate device that has a certificate on there. So we only need him to log in with an ID and a password. He's on a trusted device. We trust this person. Now here I got somebody who has a funny accent and coming from some Eastern European country, and he says he's in security. That means he knows how to hack the system. We don't trust him as much. So again, we're going to change this a little bit. This type of person, untrusted device, we're going to make sure to do Radius, have the token, make sure he has, this token, and use a username and password as well. And then we have a third user. So this guy's got his own identity provider, so we just let him in. So he's fully, we completely trust this guy. But again, you could have this being like a Google identity provider or Bing or Okta. So from a single experience for the user, like a single URL based on who you are or what device you're using, with N-factor, we could automatically do different forms of authentication challenges. If we trust the device, it might be easier. If we trust the device and you're in a certain location, it could be easier. If you're on an untrusted device, and depending on the content, we can change the different ways you authenticate into this particular environment. But all these types of things, so what's interesting about this is if you use Google as IDP or an Okta IDP, the challenge becomes integrating this with the Citrix virtual apps and desktops, and that's how we get into the federated authentication service.
Well, the real challenge is more the Windows, pretty much, OK. The only thing that Windows understands is the simple passwords. Windows is completely based on the text-based passwords. And the only other real authentication method that it supports is using the smart card. So Windows is really problematic once you are trying to implement these modern authentication and authorization methods because it doesn't speak federation at all. You cannot use, let's say, your Facebook account to sign into Windows. That's not possible. Now, we do have one technology which we call FAS, Federated Authentication Service, where we are doing this. And if you think about all the examples that we gave you before, how the federation works, how the gateway works, what you want to achieve is whoever comes in at the end, you want to have a running session on top of Windows operating system. So pretty much what you want to do is that you want to be able to take this user, use Active Directory account, and get him in the system. Now, how can you actually do this when the user is actually using the Google account? How do you technically implement it? How do you link this together? That's the really big question, and Windows cannot really do this. Windows doesn't have any support for the federation at all. Now, the Federated Authentication Service, FAS, what we are doing here, and I really love this product because it's solving so many different issues, is following. Again, federation, not using single account, using multiple accounts and just linking them together through attributes. So if you have your identity stored in the Google, let's say, what you need to do is that first you need to create matching account in Active Directory. You can use tools, AD-Sync, for example, you can script it, or if you are dealing with individual contractors, for example, you just create it manually. Doesn't matter. But you need to have matching, it's called shadow account in Active Directory. That's step number one. Step number two, when the user, external user connects to the gateway is going to authenticate him with identity provider that you are using, pretty much Google, for example. In return, the information that is exchanged between Google and gateway, this is completely bypassing the endpoint. The Google is going to confirm and it's going to say, this user that you just sent to me, I can confirm that his email address is martin.zuzek@gmail.com. That's the only information pretty much that the gateway is going to get back. The next step is, gateway is going to do Active Directory lookup. It's going to find any Active Directory account where the user principal name, that's not email address, that's the user principal name, is the same as the Gmail address. So it's going to find martin.zuzek@gmail.com. Technically speaking, you could use email, but you don't want to do it because email is considered unsecure attribute. So you want to use one of the secure attributes, such as the user principal name. Now at this moment, what the gateway knows is this user owns this Gmail address, and I've been able to find the matching Active Directory account. I don't have permissions to Active Directory, I just know this is the name of the matching account. So how do you go from this information to the fully functional Windows session? Gateway is going to take this information and it will forward it to storefront. It's going to say to storefront, this user that just logged on, this is his AD account, so display all the resources that you have for this AD account. So you are going to see all the icons, applications, desktops, everything. And as soon as the user clicks on the icon, we go to the brokering and we find the Windows server or Windows desktop where his session should be opened. Storefront is going to forward this information to FAS, and technically what FAS got nothing to do with federation. The name is a little bit confusing. What the FAS is that it's virtual smart card provider. Again, in Windows you can do explicit username and password, or you can do smart card. FAS is the storage of the virtual smart cards. So the next thing is, FAS knows that this user wants to go to this Windows session, and is going to check if the virtual smart card has been already generated for this user or not. If not, it's going to ask certificate services to generate the smart card for it, and is going to store it in the local data store. The last step is, the FAS is literally going to open the door. It's going to take the virtual smart card, plug it to the virtual port, start the Windows session, and then the storefront is just going to send the user over to the session that was actually technically logged on by the FAS itself. So this way, and if you think about it, and this is actually quite important, the only authority for the FAS is the storefront. The FAS never knew about any Google account that was used here. The only information that FAS ever receives is I would like you for me to log on using this Active Directory account that I just provided to you. So from security perspective, we are always recommended treat FAS the same way as you would do the domain controller, for example. This is potentially very powerful component that you have in your environment, so you want to make sure that it's properly secured. So now let me show you how this looks like in real life. And when you are going to see this demo, think about what I was showing you before, how many moving parts that are actually involved. So first step is the user is going to type in the URL for the gateway. As soon as he reaches the gateway will see that he's not authenticated, and it's going to redirect him automatically to the Google. If I would be already logged on to Google before, I would completely skip this, and I would just be asked, do you want this gateway to access your information stored on the Google? So I enter my email, I enter my password. Now the Google sent back the information to the gateway saying, yes, he owns this email address. The gateway forwarded this to the storefront. The storefront asked the FAS to generate and use the virtual smart cards. The FAS logged me on and then just allowed me in to this Windows machine. Now one interesting note that I would like to make here is notice the username that I'm using here. This got nothing to do with the original Gmail address that was used. So I was able to take two accounts that are completely separate, one on Google, one in Active Directory, and I was able to use the FAS to actually link them together and at the end create this Windows session.
All right, so we've looked at how you can go beyond passwords, not just using the standard password, to get access to all the different resources. But part of it came down to multi-factor authentication. How do you incorporate something like TOTP, or how do you use a on-prem gateway with like n-factor authentication to do more custom authentication challenges for the environment based on the unique characteristics or the unique scenario that you have. So we've built that foundation of Workspace in the last session. Here we've shown you how you can just don't have to standardize on AD or Azure AD. You have options to use different identity providers. Now the next episode or the next session that we have in this whole Geek's Guide to Workspace series, again in this room, is looking at the single sign-on to SaaS and web applications, as well as providing enhanced security. And we gave you an overview of that in the first session, but this next one we're going to go a lot more detail of not only looking at SaaS apps, but looking at web apps, looking at mobile apps, how to do that single sign-on to all these different applications and doing that enhanced security capabilities. And before we leave, I will leave you with one more demo because we've been using Google a lot, and because you know how much I love Chuck Norris, or at least Chuck Norris jokes. So you can type "find Chuck Norris" on Google and do "I'm feeling lucky," and you get an interesting response there that Google actually will not find Chuck Norris for you because it's afraid as well. And with that, thank you. We're going to get off stage. If you have questions, come on up. So we want to give the next group up here time to prepare. But if you have questions, you can.
Yeah, and one last note. I just wanted to ask, how many of you have heard about the Citrix Tech Zone? OK, so anyone who haven't heard about it and would like to get some stickers, just stop by here. I have plenty of stickers to hand over today. No T-shirts, only the stickers today. Thank you very much.